Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Help Me Buy Property podcast. In the episode today, we are talking about how to create real estate business via property investing, be it passive property investing, transitioning into active property investing. In this topic today, we'll talk about these transitions and why is development an important part of these transitions, or property development an important part of these transitions. Who are the people who would usually transition into property development space, or who would want to transition into property development space? Why is it important for these people to transition into this space? And who are the people for which this transition does not make sense? Now, also, very critically, what happens to the people for which the transition makes sense, but they resist the change? This is the part one of the episode of creating business via property investing. We would have part two where we would be talking about how to transition from buy and hold strategies to buy, hold, and development strategies, and how to create a business of property. Stay tuned and keep listening to the very end. Thank you very much. Today's topic, we'll talk about how to transition from buy and hold strategies to buy, hold, and develop. Why is this transition important? Who are the people who would transition in today's time? Or why would people want to do the transition? Why is it important for people to do the transition? And who are the people who would actually not do the transition? And what happens to people who resist the change? So, in saying that, let me introduce you to my co-host, drum roll again, Cheryl Leong.
Hey
Cheryl,
Moss,
how are you today?
doing? From sunny
Queensland.
Queensland. You commented I've got a bit of a Queensland glow already, and it's absolutely beautiful. So
Yeah, Queensland glow already.
for
Yes,
those of you who like to drive up the Queensland prices,
that's awesome.
that's the place to be. Yeah. So no, I think it's a great topic because we get this a lot. Right? I mean, someone might be, and I've seen this many times where someone might have been a quite an astute and quite a seasoned buy and hold investor, and to a certain extent, questions like what's next? What can I do next to take things to another level? And whether it's out of just wanting a little bit more something more creative, or just being able to say, actually, I'm at the point where I want to leverage a bit more of my return on investment. So I think this is really good to dive into
Definitely,
dive into
definitely.
those sort of topics. So I mean, how do you
Yes.
and create this business of real estate and property investing treating?
If you ask me, I'm the most biased person when it comes to property investing and developments, right? Because, I am definitely a pro developer. But, if you take a step back and think about real estate as a business, it's the third biggest industry in the world. I was looking at some stats and some numbers. There's close to about 2,700 billionaires in the world right now, and 8% of them made their wealth in real estate, which is a big number, right? And so if you think about how many billionaires have diversified into real estate, the numbers something looks like about 95% of people diversified into real estate, into keeping their wealth and securing their wealth. And so in the truest essence, it makes sense to invest in real estate to make it much more inflation proof, or generational wealth. And how far do you go down the route is the question, and that's what we're discussing today. And so if you think about creating the business via property investing, I always say this, that there is three ingredients to it when you're talking about these transitions. And so it's yield, growth, and manufactured equity, which is almost like return on investment.
Mm.
And so when you are taking that transition from buy and hold strategies, what you're doing is you're bringing more focus on manufacturing your own equity by creating more profits through property development, small scale developments, renovations, etc. And so what you're doing is you're stepping away from that gamble of the market, where you're at the mercy of the market to deliver growth to you all the time.
Mm.
And that's the transition that we're talking about. And how successfully do you do it? How cleanly do you do it? Is the question.
And this is,
Naturally, the question becomes is,
Yeah, the question then becomes, well, because we've been talking about how to identify the right suburbs and the right areas to invest in, and because we want to be able to identify its areas of growth. And the thing that we're doing with development, with whether it's renovation or actually full scale development, he said we're actually creating that growth, that capital growth, which we that particular area on that particular area might not have generally have had.
Definitely. And if you take it further a step away or further step ahead, it doesn't matter which market are you talking about, what macro environments are. You would be successful in doing it even in a downturning market, even when the interest rates are high, low, even during GFC, right? Global financial crisis. A lot of people made a lot of money even during that time, while the market was dropping. And I always say that you make the best money in the dropping market, and I made my best money in the dropping market, not in the rising market. So, yeah.
And so, in saying that,
And so,
does that mean that when you're trying to find for properties that may be suitable for renovation or development, that in terms of location and all the things that we spoke about in terms of the data points in terms of growth and all of that, they're not as relevant, or they are just as relevant, but some things not so much?
100%. Yeah. Look, I would say that, the suburb selection is still important. It's not that, you're going to drop the ball on suburb selection, because when you are doing developments, a better suburb selection provides a natural buffer to developments. And so when you're doing the feasibilities, if you pick the right suburb in the right location, that suburb is going to provide a natural buffer to your development profits, because there would be growth profits together coming into your development profits. And we'll talk about this further down as to why people get confused when they buy a property in a growth suburb and they're doing a development there, and there's immense amount of growth that comes through, and they're like, oh, if I should have held this property for X amount of time, I would have made the same amount of money. And yeah, and so 100%, you can't just discount the thinking around, oh, you're not going to select the suburb, right? The suburb selection still matters a lot, but that's not the only factor when it comes to development.
Yeah, absolutely. So for someone looking to transition, what are the key things that you think that are the steps towards determining whether it's the right step for you? Because we're going to be discussing whether it is the right step, like is transitioning or adding to your portfolio development or renovation the right step. What are the first things that we need to be considering?
And so if you think about the people who would be pro transitions, are people who are income earners, or what I call it PAYG income earners, who wants to create a business for themselves, who wants to create a business for their retirement, who wants to create a secondary business on the side. You would also be looking at people who do not have access to infinite amount of wealth when it comes to business, right? You can add more people and grow your business through the top line. And so these people, in order for them to improve their serviceability, this would naturally be the path to kill that dependence on the serviceability from their own personal income. You are also looking at people who are trying to diversify into other businesses. And so they have their own business, but their business is not doing awesome. It's not, hitting goals. It's not a multi-million dollar business. And so they're looking for another opportunity or a side business that can take, almost like a prime position in their already diversified portfolio of businesses that they are running. It's very important when people think about their retirement plans. For a lot of people, retirement does not necessarily mean that you do nothing. Retirement means that you still have to keep yourself occupied. And so for PAYG income earner, it's important that they do something. And so naturally, the property is the easiest fallback, where they think that, oh, if I can keep doing these small scale developments on the side while I'm living my retired life, be it 50, 55, 60, that would be an easy, chunky money for myself
And
on the
it's
side.
also it's I like the point around being able to supplement your own income. because it's something to us, you can manage the quantity and the number of projects you're doing in terms of adding that extra income. And so it's something where you can still be working your full-time job, and actually you probably still want to, because it helps with your serviceability of being able to potentially purchase something based on your serviceability and then do a renovation or a development. And then you've got this extra level of, if you're holding the property, an extra level of income. So that's bolstering your serviceability over and over again. So, the point we're making here is that being able to add this level of development or renovation to your portfolio actually helps you get closer to your financial goals.
Definitely.
However, I guess there's the part, having the knowledge, the time, and the expertise to actually execute that as well.
Yeah, and so if you look at a lot of tradies, you talk about electricians, plumbers, carpenters, they are natural. It's just so much synergies within their businesses, especially if they're running a business, that it just makes a lot more sense for them to basically put their hand up and say, okay, you're going to go down the route of doing a development. The PAYG income earners, when you think about it, it's the real risk is them. And so they need to really think about, okay, I'm going to adopt an extra risk or higher risk. And so how do I manage that risk while I have my PAYG income coming on the side, that I don't overextend myself, I don't get into things that I can't get out of, I don't have hands-on experience to do some of these things. And so it's important to understand that, while you're increasing your risk for amazing returns, that amazing returns could disappear pretty quickly if you're not managing the risk quite openly. And so, and so that's a good segue in talking about the benefits of the transition, right? And so what do you think would be ultimately the benefits that we can talk about in people actually taking this transition?
Well, I say it's really, if you're someone that's wanting to achieve your goals a lot quicker, this is one way to be able to do that through property. That we mentioned it before, like not having to wait for the property to necessarily increase by itself, that we're manufacturing it. And I like to use the word at wholesale, because if you're doing
Yes,
the renovation or you're doing development, you're basically producing the property at wholesale price. You're not purchasing a property where whether you're increasing your equity in some way or form, you can access that again. So I think that's the benefit in transitioning, it's speeding up that process of getting to where you want to be
definitely.
a lot quicker.
Definitely.
You can also, when you look at the cash on cash return. So the cash on cash return means that, say if you've put $50,000 into a deposit and you've got either income or equity that's been returned from that property, like, is that a 15, 20, 100% return on investment? For a lot of buy and hold properties, that might be the case. Whereas if you're doing a development, that could take it up to 50, 100, $200,
Right.
200% cash on cash return.
Definitely.
So I think it'd be really good to run through a bit of an example of that, because that might be a little bit sort of,
Yeah.
what is she talking about? So I know you've got a bit of an
Yeah,
example
no,
to
definitely. And
explain that a bit
I think a
better.
lot of people, when they talk about these transitions, they naturally think that you're not doing buy and hold and you're just doing developments, right? And so you and me both know that even developers do buy and hold. And so the idea is to how to do it in such a way that, you're catching the best of both worlds, right? And so if you look at numbers, and it's I'm a numbers guy, and I always like quoting numbers and putting numbers against a lot of these things to see as to what does that really mean. Let's make some high level assumptions. Let's try to understand with an example. And so we'll use normal Australian average assumptions across the board. And so 6% growth year on year on an average property that we are talking about. Of course, it's not in a straight line. You might get 20%, 30% in 1 year. But for the sake of this numbers exercise, what we are assuming is, let's assume that there are 4 properties, there are 2 people, person A, person B. One person has 4 properties, each worth, say, $500,000, total portfolio value at, say, $2 million, portfolio growing at 6%. And in 10 years' time, that portfolio would naturally be worth at about $3.6 million. Okay, considering the compound growth, etc., all of that. Now, if you're assuming that you acquired that portfolio at, say, 20% of, say, $400,000, you look at the acquired equity growth, you're talking about 1.58 million, which is about roughly 30% cash and cash return, which is really good. Okay. Now, the assumption here is that all the properties are performing the way that they are supposed to perform. And we both know that not every property performs. And so if you find like 20 astute investors and ask them, hey, out of the 5 properties that you have, is every property giving you what you want? And they'd be like, oh no, 3 is doing this, 2 is doing so you would hear that. But for the sake of this comparison, let's assume that all of the properties are right suburbs, right selection, they're doing awesome. And so you are sitting on an acquired equity of about $1.5 million. Now, assume person B. And so person B, who is transitioning into property development. And so they have 4 properties worth $500,000. And they have 4 properties, say they have 3 properties worth, say, $500,000. And, they are going to acquire a 4th property, which is going to be a development property that they are going to, deliver developments on. And so on average, that 4th property, for the sake of this assumption, we are going to assume an absolute number. And we are saying that every 2 years, they get that chunky profit of $250,000 for every development deal that they are going to do. Now, in the bigger scheme of things, we know that 250,000 is an average return on a very mediocre deal when you talk about development. Okay, you can go as high as millions. Okay, and so you're talking about a very mediocre deal that is going to generate them $250,000. Okay, every second year. Now, again, the first 3 properties at 6% yield, you would generate, about 10 years have passed. 3 properties have generated about 1.186 million, which is again 30% cash on cash growth, similar to, person A. But the balance of the portfolio, this is where it becomes interesting. So the balance of the portfolio over the 10 years have generated close to about 1.25 million, which is almost like 80% cash and cash return. Now, if you look at the total portfolio return for this scenario, that comes to about $2.4 million. And so they have generated close to about $800,000 in access equity just by leveraging debt better. That's how I look at it. All they're doing is they're leveraging debt better. And if you assume a compounding nature of the return on developments that a person makes, and so instead of them doing every second year a $250,000 deal where they're making $250,000 profit, if you're assuming a compounding nature of even, say, 4 or 5% on it, that number of 1.25 can blow up to 1.7 million quite quickly. And which means that during the same amount of time, the 10 years pass between the two people, what you are looking at is that the net wealth is almost doubled between the buy and hold scenario and buy, hold, and develop scenario. And so the other person is almost sitting on about 2.9 million worth of net wealth versus 1.6 million of net wealth that we were talking about in scenario 1. Now, of course, in both scenarios, what we're making is a bold assumption, right? That everything happens hunky-dory, nothing goes wrong, and everything happens clockwork, right? So that's a very, very bold assumption, be it for buy and hold strategies or buy and develop strategies, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing, we've got to be able to go, well, typically if it's a development or whichever, your interest rates might be a little bit more expensive. You might get delays in time. So, this is really just a high level and very simplified version of being able to show like how you can able to leverage that extra equity. Again, it's making sure that you understand the numbers. It's, we always want to make sure that you've done the numbers and the feasibilities, and your feasibilities are conservative. To be able to then see what your cash on cash return is as well.
Definitely, 100%. And so I think naturally, people talk about, or I've seen people arguing about, and I was one of those people actually, where you buy a property and once you've done the development, you think about, hey, if I would have sold the property as is, I would have potentially made the same amount of money rather than doing the full development, right? And so how do you answer to those people, Cheryl?
without all the stress and all the additional costs. You know, I'm not here to ever convince people, and it's all around. First of all, making sure that they've got a certain level of risk. You know, they've got a certain level of risk appetite. What risk appetite do they have? And then secondly, they've got this level of commitment to the process that yes, there is going to be an extra level of risk. But, you know, if they're able to show you that potentially you can do this, it is going to be around whether it's something that they really want to. And quite, you know, there might be people who are just like, you know what, um, maybe potentially I can because development, we know there is a certain level of risk and nothing's guaranteed. Whereas there are some people who are low, you know, have a lower risk appetite and maybe just like, I'm happy to just hold it. It's okay. I might have, you know, I might have a big backyard which can be developed, but, you know, it's fine if you're able to show them and guide them through and be able to say, hey, we can do this and this is how we manage the risk and so on and so forth, and we can get you this outcome.
Mm.
If they're willing to be part of that, then that's excellent. That's part of their journey. And then you can, you know, that's something that they're open to. But I'm also conscious there are many, many people out there that just sort of go, it's fine. I don't need to deal with the stress because there are things about development that are stressful. There are things about development that
100%.
you do need a bit of time to, you know, invest the time in. And for, you know, for a lot of people, they're happy if they're happy with the status quo and, you know, not judging, but then they're happy with the status quo. That's fine.
Yeah,
But if they're uncomfortable and want to push the status quo and create something else, then just with anything, you there is a level of risk, but you can manage that, and that might end up being a much better outcome than you initially thought. So, yeah, I
definitely.
think it's my long-winded way of saying, you know, setting out this is what is
Definitely.
possible,
Yeah.
but it does come down to what, you know, is this part of your path or not?
Yeah. And naturally, when you think about people, especially when they are persistently thinking about going into development, they think that every site that has a development potential needs to be developed, right? And so I was talking to a client like recently,
Yeah. Yeah.
or person recently, not a client, a person recently, and they've gone ahead and developed something where they would potentially not make a lot of money, right? And so it's important for people to understand that just because the site can be developed does not mean that it should be developed because there might not be any money in it. And so it's
Mm,
important to, you know, understand the risks, understand, you know, what a development profit is and a growth profit is, and, you know, holding yourself accountable to the feasibilities that you're going to do and understanding why are you making this choice in the first place, why are you going down the route of doing a development. You know, you don't want an extra stress and extra headache of
yeah.
managing a build, you know, organizing finances only to make a lousy $100,000, right? You want to make big money for you to take big risks.
Or less than that.
Yeah, or negative returns, right? You know, I've seen people, you know, making negative returns in some instances too. And so it's very, very important to understand that you are in it to make money. And so if you're taking that sort of risk, then you're not doing it for nothing.
Yeah, yeah, and I see this a lot with people who sort of take on their first development, and it's a duplex build, for example. So they may have in their mind, I bought this property with an old house and a piece of land for $1 million, but I could sell each of these for $1 million when they're completed, and they do really high level numbers. They're like, okay, it's $1 million here, $1 million there. That's $2 million. Land cost me $1 million. I think the build's gonna be about 700,000, and that's it. But so they haven't dived into the other parts of what it costs to do that, the holding costs, the contributions, the DA and the CC costs and everything else. So those costs very easily escalate, and that's not including the landscaping and everything else. So what we're
Definitely.
saying here is that yes, you know, you may be excited about doing a development of some sort. It's really understanding, not forgetting that the numbers need to stack up, and do a development just for the sake of doing it and because you want to sort of do something different. You got to make sure that you're preserving. Preservation of your wealth is a huge part of this. We want to grow the wealth, but we want to also preserve the wealth as well.
Definitely, definitely. And when you think about it, education is an important thing. So that's what I'm hearing, that learn to do it, or do it with someone who has done it numerous number of times before, so that you are not setting yourself up for failure. And that's the key thing, right? Don't just assume that, oh, just because this person is doing, you can do it as well. If development was that easy, everyone would be doing it, right? And there is only a handful of developers that you can count who are doing amazing work, is because it's not easy. It is a business of complex transactions. It is a business of managing a lot of complexities.
Yeah. And the point to also note is that development is not just around knocking down and building something new all the time. Development's also renovating, it's improving your space, it's problem solving, it's going, how can I extract either more income or equity out of a particular property? And income may be like, what if I
Definitely.
were to, back in the days, build a granny flat, rent it out, or section off a particular part of the house, get some extra income from that. So don't feel that you need to take the whole plunge of going, I'm going to knock down and then build 20 stories of units or whichever. That's not necessarily the case. It is around
Definitely.
problem solving and
Definitely.
squeezing and leveraging as much as you can out of either your current portfolio or the properties that you want to build as well.
Definitely. And when you talk about transition, you are talking about small steps, right? You are talking about little
Mm.
steps to take you where you want to get to. You're not talking about, taking huge leaps, or exactly what you're saying, building 20 stories. It's about consistent small steps that is going to basically help you grow your portfolio. It's going to help you, become that business owner that you want to become, right? It's about protecting your wealth. It's about passing on that wealth to your kids. It's about passing on that business, as a family business to your kids, right? And I hear my kids, when I take them to auctions every time, and they're like, "Hey, Dad, this is so much fun. I think I would
Mm.
want to do this as a business, right?" And so,
That's awesome.
yeah, it's
Because they
about,
feel every time they
for
put up
me,
their
or
hands.
if I think about some of these things.
So I was going to say, Moss, is that because they think every time they put up their hands, they win a house? It's that easy. It's like going to
It's
the
interesting
ATM,
that, when you're
and
teaching
going,
them. No, 100%. 100%. And so when you think about some of these things, and you think about transition, you're also thinking about the risks to transition, and you're also thinking about who's taking the transition, who's not taking the transition. And we'll be talking about who are the people where transition does not make sense, and so what are the risks to the transition, and so why would people not take that transition, and who are the people who resist transition, right? And so we'll be talking about some of these things as well. I think that would be the key. But it's important to get a better understanding about how to take this transition. A lot of people ask me this question, Moss. I want to become a developer, and how do I go about becoming one, or how do I go about changing my profile from being a builder to a developer, right? Yeah, it's an interesting ask, right? Because you see a lot of people dropping everything to become a builder, or dropping everything to become a developer. And I say that it's not a clean transition. It's not like, you go cold turkey and you just buy one property and put everything, all eggs in one basket. As you were mentioning, it's a slow transitioning process where you're thinking about, doing renovations, saving a house at the front, building one at the back, like a battle axe. It's a slow, gradual process that would take you there. Of course, there is structures that you can play with as well. Interesting conversation. So we have talked about the risks. We have talked about, why should you take the transition? What are the benefits of taking the transition? Who are the people who would take the transition? What we would discuss in the next episode would be how to successfully take a transition. What are the stages that you would take in taking that transition, if you are keen to increase your risk appetite to do it, what are the key mistakes that people make in taking these transitions? We would also talk about people who would never want to take these transitions and why would they never want to take these transitions. And then there are people who should be taking transitions, but they resist to these transitions. And so we would be talking about a bit of that as well in relation to understanding. But that was a great episode. Thank you very much, Cheryl. Any parting comments, Cheryl, before we close this episode?
No, it's. I think there's a lot to digest here, and it's just to be able to tweak our audience's probably interest in terms of if you are thinking about going, I'm going to start developing in somewhere. From these are some of the things for them to chew on, and I know we'll be diving a little bit more into this in the next episode as well. So stay tuned.
Thank you very much, everyone. Keep smiling, be kind, keep investing. This is Moss and Cheryl checking out. Adios.
Ciao, ciao.